What up, Pearl? It's a girl. Just one of the guys down here. Well, I could be more specific. I'm a human. And I just wanted to know, for the sake of all the Gamians out there, just wanted to say, we love the Gam. It is our subject. We love the Gam. It is important.
Hey, it's DJ Najir. I'm like a man, just less advanced, and my IQ is huge.
Hey, I'm DJ Yad. No one knows what I do, but I look pretty cool. I'm not smart or intelligent.
Hey, I'm DJ Ash, and I'm always getting smart.
How is it going? I'm DJ Sandy. I'm happy with everyone's heart. And welcome in the 4inTalk podcast show. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Go! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. You are now listening to DJ Ash here on 4inTalk. It's Friday and first day of the month of April.
Are you excited to listen for today's episode? Well, we are going to talk about chemical bonding. You may now fasten your seatbelts, Camians. The episode title is entitled as Start Up, as how the ionic and covalent bond works.
So, any idea about chemical bonding? Have you heard it before?
Well, a little bit. A chemical bonding is a force that holds groups of two or more atoms together and makes them function as a unit.
We can use water as an example, right?
Exactly!
For example, we have the chemical symbol for water, which is H2O. It consists of two atoms of hydrogen and only one atom of oxygen. Let us visualize first hydrogen and oxygen alone. So initially, we can only imagine the two elements being separated, but because of the force of the chemical bond, it holds the two hydrogen atoms together with the oxygen. After we have combined the H and O and we get water, its properties are no longer the same from H alone and or with O alone. It forms a new unit which functions on its own. Do you guys get it?
I think it would be better if we refer to another definition.
So, a chemical bonding it is the physical phenomenon of chemical substance being held together by the attraction of atoms to each other through sharing or electrostatic force, as well as exchanging of electrons.
Do you know what causes these forces? The bonds are formed when constituent atoms come close enough together, such that the outer electrons of one atom are attracted to the positive nuclear charge of its neighbor.
Before we proceed on that, if you are not that familiar to electrostatic forces, it is when you have charged particles that have different charges, positive and negative, which causes them to be attractive to one another. While outer electrons are those electrons that are in outer shell. Okay, back to you, DJ Alamina.
As I was saying, those electrons, negatively charged, that get close to the other atoms, they get attached to the positive nucleus of that particular neighbor atom.
In short, attraction between charged particles.
I have a question. Is it important to form chemical bond? Because it was mentioned that most of the matter around us are aggregate of atoms of different elements.
Atoms interact with one to another from aggregates such as molecules, compounds, and crystal because doing so lower the total energy of the system. That is, the aggregates are more stolen than the isolated atoms.
That means the stability of those combined atoms are way more stable than those isolated atoms. Am I right?
Yes, you're right.
Many atoms become stable when their outermost shell is filled with electrons or when they satisfy the octet rule. So, what is an octet rule?
An octet rule is a rule wherein most elements follow this by having electrons in their outermost shell. So when it is filled with 8 electrons, that means it became more stable. If not, it is unstable.
There is another way to achieve stability. It is through chemical bonding.
So let us move on to the types of chemical bond, which are
Ionic bonding and covalent bonding. Ionic bond results from the transfer of electrons from one element to another, whereas covalent bond results from the sharing of electrons between two atoms. Ionic bond form between metal and nonmetal, and covalent bond form when two nonmetal combine, also form when a metalloid bond to a nonmetal.
how are each type formed? Can you guys guess?
The type of bonding is determined by how the outermost electrons of an atom, the so-called valence electron, interact with neighboring atoms.
You got it!
Let us now focus on ionic bonding. Ionic bond is a chemical bond formed through of one or more electrons from one atom or group of atoms to another atom or group of atom.
What makes them differ from each other?
An ionic bond essentially donates an electron to the other atom, participating in the bond, while electrons in a covalent bond are shared equally between the atoms. The only pure covalent bonds occur between identical atoms.
Are there some examples of ionic compounds that we use in daily life?
Yes, there are actually many examples of ionic compound that we use in our daily lives. Such examples are table salt, iodized salt, baking soda, bleach, and toothpaste.
But how about covalent bonds?
Some examples of covalent compounds are water, sugar, vinegar, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and even diamonds.
But can you give an example of how this ionic bond works?
For example, sodium and chlorine. Like sodium wants to lose, but chlorine wants to gain. It's perfect. So sodium gonna give up its electron, and that electron is transferred to chlorine. And when that happens, we can have anions. As soon as the sodium gave up its electron, sodium got positive charge, and chlorine gained an electron, so that chlorine got a negative charge. And what happens to opposite charge? They attract, and so now we have that strong ionic bond created by the attraction between the sodium ion and chlorine ion.
How does covalent bond work?
For example, hydrogen and oxygen. And those oxygen wants 2 electrons, and so we have 2 hydrogen, but by sharing electrons, that gives hydrogen to duet and oxygen its octet.
Now let's move on to the games. Hi! Another week, another day, another learning in chemistry. This podcast show is about chemical bonding. Before we end, let us have a short activity, or games as we call on. This activity is called
What bond will form? Identify if it is covalent or ionic bond. Sodium and iron together. So what bond is that?
The answer is ionic bond.
Hydrogen and oxygen combine together.
The bond is covalent.
Lithium and fluorine, they combine together. What bond is that?
Come together, it is ionic bond. How about copper and neon?
Neither.
Why?
There is no bond because neon is a noble gas. The octet is full. It doesn't have a bond. It doesn't need an electron, and it doesn't want to give up an electron.
We have sulfur and fluorine.
Covalent.
Lastly, how about arsenic and chlorine?
Covalent.
So that is all for the game segment. Now let's move on to the episode hashtag. And our episode hashtag is
Hashtag 4inTalk with chemical bonding.
that is all for this podcast show. This is 4inTalk signing off in your podcast show. Goodbye.